So this is a continuing course on progressive stages of meditation on emptiness, but it says people are following that online, and then it's also our monthly meditation and teaching day here at the Hermitage. So it's also a kind of, people can just come, so that the only problem with that is that if you just come, you've come to the middle of a course, and so you are sort of being dropped in the deep end. So I hope nevertheless you manage to pick something up from what I'm teaching about today, which is continuing with working through progressive stages of meditation on emptiness, which is about to come out as an audio book and is being translated into Spanish and Arabic at this very moment. It's in many languages actually. I keep changing it because the more I read it, the more I think, no, that's not quite right, because it's dealing with very subtle things in a very in ordinary language. So you could understand everything in all sorts of different ways, especially by the time it's been translated. And the more you go through it, the more you realise how many more questions there are. But it's a good layout of the basic approaches you get to this teaching on emptiness within the Buddhist tradition, starting with a sort of more rough and ready general idea, and then becoming more subtle as you work through. And certainly if you read books on Buddhism, you will have emptiness talked about from different points of view, and if you just pick up a bit here and you pick up a bit there, there's no doubt you will either never change your view from what you started with, or you will end up very confused because you'll have all these different views and not know quite how they fit together. And this book is, I think, is very useful. It's based on Khenpo Rinpoche's teachings when he first came to the West, where he related all the different, what you might call philosophical schools in Buddhism, to stages of going more deeply into your own experiential understanding of emptiness, which is what we want, isn't it? We want to be able to follow this. We don't really care what the schools taught. What we want to know is what is true about my own experience and what's the significance and meaning of emptiness that the Buddha was teaching. Why emptiness? Doesn't sound very useful, does it? Why would I want to know about emptiness? Unless we've already had some kind of intuitive sense of emptiness, and now we want to know more about it. Anyway, the first chapter is talking about, it's called Shravika view, the Shravika view of not self, of the person. And that raises lots of questions about what is a person, how are we using the word self, and what do we mean when we say something is not self. And it's expressed particularly in terms of what are called the 5 skandhas, and that sounds terribly technical, but actually it's pretty straightforward. How do we experience ourselves as a person? Well, we experience our body, first skandha. We experience our feelings, second skandha. We experience our perceptions, third skandha. We experience our different patterns of mind formations, things going on in our minds. That's the fourth skandha, and then a kind of overall sense of consciousness of all of that, which is the fifth skandha. And the important point for the first part of the analysis, the way it's laid out in this book, is that when we talk about our skandhas, we think about them in a very common sense way in terms of time and space. And we think of them, our body, for example, can be broken up into pieces, to bits, and then smaller bits and smaller bits and smaller bits until actually it's just a collection of bits. And then when we look at that collection of bits, we think, well, that's not me. That's just a collection of bits. So then the feelings, which are basically a feeling of attraction or aversion or neither, we're always experiencing a feeling of some sort. It's either it's okay, or it's not okay, or I'm not quite sure which it is, sort of like a bit neutral, but veering to one or the other. So, again, that's changing all the time, isn't it? Feelings are changing all the time. So although I tend to identify with, I like this or I don't like this, and this is major importance, actually, I'm not my feeling. That isn't me. So I could let that go. I could not get so attached to it. And the same with perceptions, and we are very attached to our perceptions. If you've had a bad experience with something, as soon as you see it, you're kind of, oops, it's that, and it's kind of fixed like that. And then if you discover actually your whole idea of it is wrong, then it's almost like your whole idea of yourself is wrong. If you're really angry with someone, and then you find actually there was no ground for that anger, or somebody suggests you drop your anger, it's like, but that's me, kind of. And to realise actually I don't have to act on my anger. I'm not my anger. It's a huge revelation, isn't it? It's almost like, well, who am I then? How do I move? How do I go forward in life now if that's not enough? That's true. So that kind of real strong identification and attachment to something that isn't ourselves, as if it were. And then the ultimate one is, okay, I can see all of that is not me. So I must be this vague sort of consciousness that's kind of floating around when all of that's seen as impermanent and changing and not really me. I'm this, whatever's left. Which in some ways has to be true, doesn't it? It has to be something that's left. But then that also seems to be analysable. When we think about our consciousness, we're conscious, like past consciousness. No, I'm not my past consciousness because that's gone. So I'm not my future consciousness because it hasn't come. So I'm my present consciousness right now. That's me. But then that doesn't last any time. So how can that be me? It's just like the past is gone already. That's not me. So now I'm left with, what am I? You're left with a sense of, what am I? Now what has happened in the Buddhist tradition, and you read this in many books, not only by Westerners, but it's the whole way that Buddhism is presented, even in Buddhist countries sometimes, is, well, that's it. That's what the Buddha taught. There's no self. So first you might think that's good news, because I do seem to be a bit of a nuisance to myself, and to others. So it'd be good if I wasn't there, if I wasn't myself, there wasn't no self. And in some contexts, it's quite good to think that. You're getting really excited and upset about something, and you say, "Oh, this isn't me. This isn't myself. Oh, there isn't a self. I can drop the whole thing. But there's something fishy there, isn't there? I can drop the whole thing. So I'm still there, actually. I think it's really important that you are, to be honest. It's the same with the idea, if that was enlightenment, then who would be enlightened? If that was liberation, who would be liberated? You know, you haven't really answered anything, but you've had a very interesting experience, haven't you? Because you've seen through what you thought was self, and it wasn't self. And that could have been a big relief, or could be quite scary, but whatever, that's an interesting experience to have. But it's not the end of the story. So I was explaining how Rinpoche left us with this dream example and telling us to, just notice that everything you're suffering in this life is based on clinging to yourself, clinging to what you think of as yourself, and then suffering because of that. Like if you think you're being eaten, he always uses the example of a tiger, or being burnt in a fire, swept away by a flood, or eaten by a tiger. If you're dreaming of that and then you wake up and you realise, oh, there isn't a tiger, there isn't a flood, there isn't a fire. Whew. And that's the kind of feeling of relief you would get when you woke up from a dream. And that's one way of understanding emptiness. But of course it doesn't tell you anything about anything really, does it? Because when you wake up from a dream, you're still there. I mean, that's the beginning, isn't it? That's the beginning of finding out what's real. So it's important to bear in mind there's 5 stages, and that's like a step on the way, is to be less attached to the things we're attached to in this life, because they're like a dream and an illusion, and therefore we can relax and not get too excited about it all. But that it could lead us to becoming quite impossible, because, whatever you told us, we'd say, well, that's just a dream, that's just an illusion, nothing matters, does it? Which, that's not very positive. Doesn't really tell us how to live our life. But it's good in the sense that it tells us not to be attached. So it's a good image for that. But thinking about this dream image, I thought you could have, and maybe one day to give a course on progressive stages of applying the dream example to our life. So the first level would be applying it as like, it's just a dream, so don't take it too seriously. But then the next stage is, like in a dream, things seem to be external to the mind when they're not. And this applies also to the way we perceive anything. But then this raises all sorts of questions. The big problem with that is if you were to think, okay, so through all my senses, I see things, I hear things, I smell things, I can have tactile sensation of things, even things appear in my mind, taste things, and that's how I know they're there. But when you think very carefully about that, you realise I don't really contact anything other than my own sense impression. So I say I'm feeling the chair, for example, but I'm feeling the sensation in my skin when I touch the chair, aren't I? So I'm hearing a sound, but I'm experiencing something within my own experience that's responding to something outside that I'm now calling a sound. But all I'm experiencing is actually just my own experience. So somehow something outside has managed to make contact with my mind. But where and how? where was that meeting place between the two? There's a sound, say the bird is singing, and then my ear has a faculty that allows it to pick up something. So it picks up something, and you can measure, vibrations and things. But my ear isn't picking up. I don't know anything about vibrations. The experience I'm having is a complete experience of sound. And then through putting two and two together, I work out, it's a bird making a sound and I'm hearing it. And then I learn to recognise, that's that bird again. But actually, I'm only experiencing my own experience. And I don't know how I'd get out of my experience to get hold of something outside of it, or how anything could get into my experience to kind of, I'm something else that's come into your experience. How does that work? This occupied the Buddhist thinkers and philosophers generally for a long time. So, you could say, that's all right, there's no non-duality, there's no duality between the world and our minds, which I'm always very suspicious when people say that in a jolly voice. I sort of think, what are they talking about? But that's what we're moving on to now in the Chittamatra view, is examining what is that relationship between the mind and what the mind knows as knowledge. The big danger, and I think this is a big danger that Western philosophers have been aware of over the centuries and quite worried by, is what's called solipsism, which is ending up thinking there's only me. It's only me and my experience. And there's something quite terrible about such a thought, isn't there? It's ghastly. Somebody's written in and asked me a question about, what is the question? Can we exist without any senses? Is there still an idea of a material world existing if we lost every sense? Could we still even be alive? I'm curious how this may link with the concept of persistent vegetative state, you could say, with the locked-in syndrome, and what is classed as alive and being kept alive, and so on. Sort of like, it's all quite scary stuff, isn't it? So what is the mind? And how do we rescue it from nihilism, really? That I think solipsism is a kind of nihilism, isn't it? It's a kind of meaninglessness. But on the other hand, I've raised this question many times already, I think. How do we know that there are other beings? How do we know that there's another... we know our own experience, but how do we know that that isn't just a complex, delusion, that there's other beings? And obviously, if we met someone who was like that, we'd consider them completely mad. Certainly their life would be meaningless, and, So there's something about how we know there's other beings that is not... We don't reach it through a logical, analytical means. It comes very directly, because it brings with it a sense of meaning and joy and purpose and everything that we're looking for that isn't suffering. Other beings also bring us suffering one way or another, but they're integral to what it is to be a being. There's other beings. I think it's really important to note that our whole meaning of our life really is based on something that isn't something we analyse and work out logically. But to be a reasonable, rational human being, you have to have a very strong element of intuitive sense of others. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that when we're talking in a scientific world, as if you could measure everything and we do everything totally rationally and logically. Actually, the most important things we do in our life, we can't analyse and can't do them in that way. We just do it because it's integral to what we are. I don't think I can make that point strongly enough and frequently enough to get it across. But, to be rational is not to be stuck in your head. That would be a kind of madness. That would be a solipsistic kind of existence. So I've been thinking about this for years. That's what makes it very difficult for me to go through this course and just straightforwardly stick with what I originally wrote when I was translating Rinpoche's writing. So instead I'm kind of unpicking it and giving you some more clues, more things to consider. So today I wanted to consider the statement of the Buddha that the three realms of existence, that's like the desire realms like we're in, form realms and the formless realms, are only mind, are merely mind. And the next chapter is all about that. It's called Chittamatra, which means merely mind, only mind. So taking it as given, everything that we've looked at already in terms of the skandhas are not the self, it leaves the question open as to, well, then what are they? Or what is the material world, if you like? What is the body? What are the objects of the senses? And in the Buddhist world, this was not sort of nailed down at the first stage. There was a lot of discussion about this. And in the Abhidharma, there's a lot of discussion about the very question that I raised earlier about exactly how does a sound or sensation or smell or whatever, vision, something in your vision, how does it actually become a perception? And so they tried to analyse it more and more and more into how many moments, different moments of change were involved to transform something that was a sound outside into a perception of a sound inside. And they go into a huge amount of detail in it. I suppose that arose from meditative experience. But it was still based on the assumption that mind consisted of moments of mind. And if you look at your own way of thinking, you may notice that's actually part of the way we think of mind. I say part of the way we think of mind because normally we think of mind in different ways according to context. So if you were looking at something, you would think, well, I'm looking at that, and then I'm not looking at that. Now I am looking at it. Now I'm not looking at it. Now I'm looking at it for a long time. Now I'm looking at it for a short time. How short a time can I look at it and still see it? So those kind of questions make sense, don't they? The sort of thing you might examine in the laboratory to see, like, how does perception work?
If I what?
So even though we would probably think about perception in those terms, like moments. How many moments are there in a, how long does it take to register and perceive a sound and recognise it, and then there's a kind of, it happens when we sit down to meditate and you're looking at some thoughts arise in your mind, and a thought arises, and then sometimes you're given the instruction to look at the thought to see its nature. And then when you try to look at the thought, you think, oh, I'm not sure if I'm looking at the thought or I'm looking at a second thought by means of which I'm trying to capture the first thought. Sort of very quickly you get complicated like that, don't you? So we're naturally thinking in terms of, it's moments going by. And then there's a tendency to try to catch the moment. Oh, now, can I catch it? Oh, but it's gone. I'll catch the next one, but that one hasn't come. So which one am I catch? Did I catch one? But you're thinking in that way. You've got that sort of framework. But you wouldn't dream of thinking like that if you were thinking about something important in your life, like, where should I live? You wouldn't think, well, it doesn't matter because I'll be gone by the time I get there. I persist through time, and in fact, nothing you say about your life would make sense unless there was a sense that it wasn't cut up into those moments. That there's something about the whole of it that means something. So we switch about, don't we? And we tend to call it all mind. And so does the Buddhist tradition in all the different contexts. So I thought, before we start on the chapter, let's look at these different ways that mind is used. So that's what you have on your handout. So those of you who've started the Discovering the Heart of Buddhism will be familiar with Chitta. And I introduced that quite quickly because it is translated as mind. It's also translated as heart. And I noticed, as a translator, that it made a huge difference which way I translated Chitta in any context. Like if I translated, Mahamudra is about realizing the nature of mind, and people would think, mind? Kind of vaguely mind. And if I said it was Mahamudra is about realizing the nature of Chitta, of heart, it'd be, heart. Heart, right, heart. And then realizing that Chitta doesn't distinguish those two. That Chitta is all of that. So that became quite a useful thing to notice before we started. So Chitta, heart, essence of a person, like the Chitta, our Chitta is the essence of our being, and that, our body, the 5 skandhas, our consciousness is all in time and can change, but the heart remains the same. And we talk like that, don't we? Yeah. That's the quality of the heart that's important. When someone dies, they're still in our heart. We still have that heart connection. We've no idea what we're talking about, but it's really meaningful, isn't it? It's really meaningful, it really matters. And that relates to suffering. We suffer when we're attached to things that don't matter. Then we can let go of them, we give up our attachment to them, and we're left with what does matter. If that also didn't matter, we would not be free of suffering, would we? We'd be left feeling totally let down. Is it all meaningless? I think that's the biggest suffering. So we have a sense already of the connection between what's fleeting, impermanent, conditioned, ultimately unreliable, and what we're looking for, which is not like that, and which perhaps we can't grasp it, but we know it's right. We can feel that's what we're looking for. That relates to the problem of suffering. We know it relates to the problem of suffering, happiness and suffering. And that's perhaps what you could call the essence of a person, whatever a person is. Okay, their body dies, their feelings change, their perceptions go awry, the habits of mind are going completely out of control, they're kind of lost consciousness, and yet they're still that person. And that's an intuitive sense that we have of that, and I think intuition should reign supreme. So it's the nature of mind beyond all the prapancha. Those who are familiar with Trusting the Heart of Buddhism, I discussed that at some length, this, what do we call that process of creating a false reality? If you call it thinking, thinking is used for other things as well. If you use it, we create, like with a dream, our mind has created the dream, but then it's done something more. It's actually become confused by the dream. It's taking it to be something that it isn't. And that's where the prapancha come in. So both the dream that we're taking to be real when it isn't, and the mind that's taking it to be real when it isn't, is all prapancha. It's kind of gets stuck. So the nature of mind beyond prapancha is like what we're aiming for. But is that what the Buddha meant when he said the three realms are mere mind? And different Buddhist thinkers have answered that differently. And perhaps you could say the way Rinpoche's laid it out in the book here is, well, all the different ways that it's been understood could be right up to a point. So there are different ways you could understand it, and that would sort of progressively become more subtle and more deep. Next word that I think we would think of as mind is vijnana, and that's what I've been talking about the stream of consciousness. That, okay, it's changing all the time. Different, we're aware of it, you could say we, excuse the grammar, because we haven't defined who we are, but there's a kind of understanding that something new's appeared, and with it came a new moment of consciousness that matched it. And then that object disappeared, and another one appeared, and then another moment of consciousness was conscious of that. Or maybe the same thing kept appearing moment after moment after moment, and then the consciousness arose moment after moment, which was kind of matching it or mirroring it. That's how we tend to think when we try to think about how perception works, or how we perceive anything, and creates this idea of a stream of vijnana, divided consciousness. And that's in the skandhas. That would be an example of a skandha of consciousness. It's made up of bits or moments. So then there's a whole range of stuff, which I've called clarity here, which we also refer to as mind. So when, the creative faculty of conceptually modelling things, you could say that's perception. When we perceive something, there's an intelligence there, isn't there? You could call it intelligence even. There's an intelligence there that can recognise that, can remember, can put together all the associations, can, sort of manipulate it in the mind. To, like if you're planning a new kitchen, to choose a topical thing. You can actually have a concept in your mind, you can move it around, you can think, you can plan, you can calculate, you can assess and measure. It's wonderful things, and then it can get quite creative. So all these things I've mentioned here, including memory, like all of that's mind, isn't it? What else is it? You know, we don't have any other classification for it, really, do we? What's memory? It's all you can say. Well, it's something to do with mind, isn't it? You can't say that's deluded because it's a sign of intelligence, isn't it? I think it's really important when we're looking at these stages to not reduce everything to, like, if you said, well, all our knowledge comes through our senses, and senses are momentary, then there wouldn't be any room for intelligence, would there? You'd have a sensation and that consciousness would be gone. I'm having this conversation with a Theravada monk in Vienna last year, thinking, as he was saying, yes, experience, mind is momentary like that. So I asked him this question, and he didn't see any problem with it. So I said, so do you think then that the totality of everything is momentary, so that it hasn't really gone, or it's re-arisen all in an instant for the next moment? Do you see what I mean? Like, if really everything goes because it's past, and that's what past means, it's gone. So for there to be anything now, it must have all instantaneously appeared now, with all the connections and relationships and everything must have reappeared in the instant, mustn't it? And then he said, well, yes, that's right. I was amazed. What amazed me most was he wasn't amazed. I said, yeah, why not? So there you go, I'll leave that for you to think about. So that might be something that we're talking about at some point, but we're not always talking about that. Certainly in Discovering the Heart of Buddhism, all of that's sort of classified under clarity. You have the openness, spaciousness, the clarity of intelligence itself, and then the sensitivity. But this is talking at a very deep level, whereas these stages are talking more about the way we think when we try to analyse what we're thinking, which leads to philosophical systems and arguments and these kind of problems we're talking about. Okay, fourth one, vikalpa. So this is sometimes translated as thinking, but it's a kind of thinking where you've made something out of what you've created a thought. So when I think, for example, I am my body, so I get really upset, when I'm faced with the death of my body. It's like facing my death, because I have a vikalpa, which is the same as a prapancha in a way, but it's perhaps less subtle. I have the idea that this body is me. So I've really identified very strongly with this body as me, or it could be, it could be my dignity or something. It's me, and So I really do indignant because, that was me. Oh, what are you talking about? I didn't do that. That's not me. Kind of. That's a vikalpa, because I'm really taking that as real. You could say, well, it is real in a way, yeah, but the way I'm taking it is I'm just sort of holding on to an idea that I don't need to hold on to, so therefore it's not me, really. But I'm treating it as if it were. And all my other perceptions, you could say. So you could say the three realms are vikalpa, couldn't you? But when he says they're all merely mind, to take birth as me in this world at this time, with all my characteristics, and this is my personality, and this is me. That's what makes me believe that I've taken birth, because I put it all together in my mind and made it all into one thing that's me. And actually I've made that all up. It's all made up. You could say that's what all beings are doing, they're making it all up. There wouldn't be these three realms of samsara if beings didn't make this up. What would there be, though? That's an interesting question, isn't it? When the Buddha says there is only mind, and if he meant there is only vikalpa, and some Buddhists think that's what he meant, then when there were no more vikalpa, there wouldn't be any more beings. But what would there be? Would there be anything? Is that what the Buddha's talking about? And what would enlightenment be? What would liberation be? What would be liberated? So I suspect the Buddha meant more than that. I'll put my money on it. But it's interesting, isn't it? So then you've got this other word that's used for mind, which is chittas. So now you've got the same word that you're used to, which is chitta, but in the plural. You might have noticed it in Wigzin Shikpo's book, Openness, Clarity, Sensitivity, where there's 4 mindfulnesses. Do you remember the 4 mindfulnesses? Mindfulness of... I've forgotten. It's mindfulness of body, isn't it? Mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of chittas, and mindfulness of dhammas. And chittas, if you look in the Satipatthana Sutta, it's talking about an interesting range of things, isn't it? I can't remember exactly. But more like states of mind, whether you're in a positive state of mind or a negative state of mind, or you've got some realization, or you could go further with this realization. You've got that sense of what your state of mind is in a sort of not so much in this, what's arising at the moment, but more in the sense of your general state of mind. But it is used for a range of things, chittas, in the plural. Like in English we use minds. I've got different, I'm in that kind of mind, I've got that kind of mind. Different. Do we use it in the plural? Minds? Yeah, we tend to use it in singular. I mean, my mind is in... I'm having a...
2 minds, though.
Oh, yes, we can. Yeah, we can mean 2 minds. It's a good example. Good example, yeah.
Half a mind.
Hmm?
Got half a mind to do.
Half a mind, yes. That's true, yeah. Yeah, so we do use it like that. So that's something that's really important to be aware of, because if you're following the path to awakening, if you're practicing Dharma, you're practicing meditation, you're very aware of your state of mind, and you're very aware of kind of general direction it's going, aren't you? Like you can tell if that's a state of mind that's kind of healthy and good and the way to go, or this is kind of approaching something but hasn't quite got there yet. You can sense that, can't you? Like if you're practicing, you tend to report things like, oh, that was a good meditation, whatever that means. But I think generally speaking what we mean is it felt in the right direction somehow. It felt right, felt good. And the opposite, if it feels very stuck, feels very stuck, just general sense of stuckness. And what do you do about that as a practitioner? You become aware of it and you cultivate as best you can. You try to find ways of cultivating positive and avoiding negative states, or when some kind of insight is starting to arise, how to kind of nurture that. And you can sense when you're following that in the right direction or not. There's only one word you could use for that, which is mind, really, isn't it? But it's different from the other things we've been saying about mind. Chittas. So I don't think, would the Buddha have been saying the three realms are merely mind states like that? Possibly, but what would he be meaning? You'd want to know more, wouldn't you? Then the last ones I've got here, there's probably more, but I just thought of these this last few days, is this word namtok, which is a very commonly used word in Tibetan. I think it's the same as vikalpa, or similar word. It's sort of thought. And, any kind of fixed idea you have is a namtok. So superstitions and making a fuss about things. And they use namtok all the time for what we're doing with our minds. Somebody's getting very upset about something, and you go and tell a Tibetan about it, and they'll say, "Oh, namtok." People and their namtoks. It's a lovely word. We all have them. We all know what they are. We've all got our own version of them. But it's also used, this is why I put it as a separate category here, is when we're looking more at the openness, clarity, sensitivity, unchanging nature, we've got some sense of, some movement towards letting go of all the things we're attached to and just opening out into the spaciousness of awareness, which Rinpoche tells us to do at each stage of the meditation just now. Having analysed, having thought about it, stop thinking about it and just rest now in the spaciousness of awareness. I don't know if his mind works like mine, but when I'm told to do that, my mind goes completely blank. What? But gradually settle down, I remember the instructions of meditation and then start to realise what that means. But what you find is, when you hear it, I'll just rest in the spaciousness of awareness, you imagine, I imagine that it'll just be like space and there won't be any namtok, there won't be any, it'll just be space. But there's always namtok. Even the idea that there will just be empty space is a namtok, isn't it? It's just an idea. So it's really important to know what namtoks are. So integral to understanding the nature of mind is understanding the nature of namtoks, which you could translate as thoughts, but you could translate various things here as thoughts, couldn't you? So I've distinguished it there. And at this stage, it really doesn't matter which of all these things it is. It's simply that distinction, almost subtle distinction between awareness when there's nothing manifesting and awareness when something's manifesting, and being able to rest knowing what that is, what that is. So you have to have pretty heightened awareness to not be caught up, because every time a numtok comes up, we tend to go with it, don't we? Sort of, or we find we've caught up in it, or we've gone to sleep on it. You know, it's like a dream. We're just taken away by the dream, aren't we? It is possible to be dreaming and to know you're dreaming and not be taken up by it. And in a way, that's what we're trying to do in our meditation. We're trying to be awake, even as the numtoks are arising, so that we can understand the nature of the mind when there's numtok, when there isn't numtok. And the implications of that. If, as the Buddha says, the three realms are only mind, merely mind, then if you can understand that nature of mind when there's nothing manifesting and the nature of mind when something's manifesting, and you completely understand that, recognize that, and can remain awake during that process, you could understand everything, not just your own mind. But there isn't anything else. That gives you access to everything. You know, sometimes that's called omniscience or knowing all. It doesn't mean you know all in a kind of, you know, grasp, got it all. It's like, not, in a way, letting yourself not know anything, and then actually all the knowledge kind of flows through you. You're not, you're completely free to express what needs to be expressed at that time, because in a way there isn't any grasping. And when that sounds strange, I think to myself about going back to number 3, how my intelligence works anyway. When I really know something and I can really do it, I don't think about it. And if I start thinking about it, I get clumsy, find it difficult. So this is complete mastery, so you never have to think, because you've completely mastered, if you like, life itself. So you can do the most complex things with complete ease, because you're completely, you could say, one with reality or one with totality, or however you want to express it. So I've kind of taken you through the progression of stages of emptiness on the theme of progression of stages of understanding the nature of mind, because they parallel each other. And I've done that because I'm hoping it will make it easier to talk about what's happening in the next chapter on the Chittamatra. That you can refer back to these, what I've said here. The way the Tibetan tradition talks about the different schools of Buddhism is as if the Buddha taught differently at different times and progressively became more subtle in the way he taught. But that's just a way, it's just a device really for the teaching device, let's say that. It's a teaching device to kind of help us to go more subtle. So I think it's important not to think that the Buddha taught like that, because I don't think he did. And he said many times he didn't teach like that. He said, I teach the truth, one truth, pure and simple, from beginning to end, to everybody, completely open-handed. I don't keep some stuff back for later. And I've been saying over the weeks how you can look at the Pali Sutras and look at the early sermons of the Buddha, and you can interpret them at any of these 5 levels, actually. Nonetheless, that isn't how it's been done, and so we leave the Shravaka view with the impression that it only goes so far, and it doesn't actually include taking the step of recognizing that you can't really divide mind from matter. I know this question I had this question very strongly when I was in my late teens. I was very puzzled by how mind and matter work together. If there was mind and there was matter that was separate, how could you know it? So it had to not be separate. I'm really convinced of that, just from my thinking. But then if it wasn't separate, was it all matter? Which is quite a common view, isn't it, in the world these days? Or was it all mind? But then, either way, once you've said it's all one or the other, you've lost any meaning to talking about mind and matter in the first place. Do you follow me? Because matter is defined as what isn't mind, and mind is defined as what isn't matter. So if they're both the same thing, we've made no progress, have we? Either it's all mind, what I think of as mind, or it's all matter. But then mind has become the same as matter. And if mind is the same as matter, it doesn't make sense, does it? Like, if it's matter and it's having thoughts, it's not matter really, is it? And of course, if it's mind and it doesn't have anything to do with matter, there isn't any matter, if you like, or matter is mind, then what's matter now? Matter's become something quite different, hasn't it? I've always found that very fascinating. So why does it matter? Why does it matter? What is the point? Don't mind. So from the point of view of the Mahayanists, they worried about the fact that matter was being put out there as something we didn't need to bother about, because we just kind of become liberated by recognizing everything's impermanent and changing, and then we become liberated from suffering, and that's it, that's the answer. And they think, hang on, that's kind of left too much out of the whole thing, and also it's a bit selfish, isn't it? You're just thinking about you're recognizing that you're liberated from your attachment, but actually when you become liberated from your attachment, then your compassion grows, and when your compassion grows, then your concern for all beings grows, and then the question arises, well, what are all beings anyway? And if there's no distinction between, if you like, inside and outside, which is sort of similar to mind and matter, isn't it? Then you can't really distinguish all beings from, the liberation of all beings from your own liberation. Because I think, we all feel that, don't we? That if you, I remember as a child, it was a very big concern of mine that I could go to heaven, but other people would go to hell. And not only that, I would know they were in hell. And I thought, well, that's not my idea of heaven, because if I know all those people are suffering, how can that doesn't satisfy me. I think many Christians are the same. They don't think that they're just going to abandon all beings because, I've gone to heaven. So with that same sort of sentiment, if I'm going to really realise what the Buddha realised, I have got to realise this question about what then is the whole of reality. And this question comes up then of, how do you know anything? Is there anything outside of mind? If there isn't anything outside of mind, then actually, when the Buddha says everything is merely mind, he means it, in like the sense 1 or 6, or like much more than just it's your own thinking. It's like whatever it is, ultimately, if you think you're separate from what you're seeing, you're already deluded. And they use some very interesting images. One of the images that comes up straight away is the beings of the 3 realms, when they are presented with what we would say was a glass of water. We would say that's a glass of water, it's for drinking. That's what our mind would tell us it was. A being in hell would see that as a cauldron of molten metal, and they would be, any contact with it would cause them tremendous suffering. That's how they're seeing it. And then another being would, like a fish, would think it's a nice place to live. I'll swim around in it. And then a god would see it as a vessel of Amrita and sort of treasure it as something very special. And for many years, when I heard that described, I thought to myself, what are they talking about? I can understand, different beings in different realms seeing different things, but if there's something in the middle that is actually there, that they're all seeing differently, what is that? What is that thing that is actually there that they're all seeing differently? So I thought that was a fault with the image for a long time. I thought, well, that's not a very useful image. It doesn't make sense. But as the years rolled by and my understanding sort of became more, kind of came together more, I realised that this is exactly what it's saying. That there is a reality there. That perhaps, we can't grasp. So all the beings that are looking at reality and grasping at it see completely different things. But they are all looking at the same reality, if looking at reality is the right way of putting it. Because there is only, if you like, there is only this one reality, call it mind or call it matter, but there is only that one reality. Which is very interesting, isn't it? Because then you've got mathematics, which is a good example of a reality that doesn't change, and yet everybody sees it differently. they see what's constructed from mathematics, but they don't see the mathematics, do they? I asked Riggsy Shikpo once whether he thought that was what was being said. So was it mathematics? And he said, not exactly. There's more to it than that, but it's in that direction. So it wasn't a silly thing for me to have said. But I think it gives a bit of a clue. So I could say a lot more, but I think I'll ask you if you've got any questions. Yes?
Well, going back a little bit, when you talk about the heart,
Yeah.
I assume that you're not talking about the physical part. It's like the mind is not the brain. So our chitta is made up of our mind and something we're calling heart, but it's not heart.
I think it's not necessary to say that, because if you say that, it's as if you know what physical heart means, and I think it's better not to assume we do. Because our idea of a physical heart is made up of our, we've got knowledge from here, there and everywhere, and our intelligence has put it together and sort of made the idea there's this physical world, there's a physical body, there's a physical organ, we've got lots of evidence for that. And actually we don't know what any of that is. And if it's not outside, if it's not a duality, then it's not actually ultimately, whatever all that is, it's not separate from what we touch when we put our hands here and say, in my heart. So, yes, it doesn't mean it in a naive way, you're right. In a sort of clunky, sort of common sense way, it doesn't mean the same. But I think it's important not to hold a view that they're different either, if you see what I mean.
I was just thinking, if I have a heart transplant.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So it's a new heart, you. Yeah. Yeah. But then again, maybe everything that we're thinking around it is completely wrong. It's completely distorted. So maybe when we have a heart transplant, if reality is actually quite different from what we think it is, maybe something's happening at quite a profound level beyond space and time at that moment. So actually the only thing that makes it possible is all those connections that are not in time and space. But of course, from the medical point of view, you only see the connections that are in time and space. So the you that is receiving the new heart isn't in time and space, but actually is connected completely to the other person whose heart it is that you're receiving. We actually don't know what we're doing, do we? But yeah, it's important to keep very loose around that. But yeah, it doesn't mean it in a naive way, no. It doesn't mean that the essence of your being can be taken out and put in someone else. Obviously not. Otherwise it all becomes meaningless, doesn't it?
So the connection's there, like a train line, but you're on a different train. You were on one train
Yeah.
and you got on another.
Something like that. But I think it's more mysterious than that even as well. What the heart really is, what the physical body really is, what anything really is. Because when you think about it, your whole idea of your flesh heart is an idea, isn't it? It's built up from what you've been told, what you've seen, what you imagine. It's all constructed. it actually might be, like obviously we could go, just to give an example of how far one could go with this, in the Mahayana Sutras, every point in space is filled with universes and Buddhas. So, what you're calling your heart might be a whole universe or universes, from another point of view. So that's why I'm trying to discourage this sort of fixing it. Oh, that's a meat heart. We actually don't know what any of it is. So that's a good place to, if you like, think from. And then notice how clunky our thinking is. I think I know what this is. It is going back to that image of the glass and looking at it from different points of view. For some people, a Buddha looking at it, he might just see countless universes of beings that he's liberating from samsara every instant, what on earth he's seeing. It's interesting, isn't it? But yeah, I've often thought about that heart transplant, wondering about a brain transplant. What would it mean? If I had someone else's brain transplanted, would I then occupy their brain, or would they then occupy me? It's the same with the heart, really, isn't it? But they do say something does come over, don't they? I don't know how long it lasts, but we think that person there is very separate from this person here. So therefore a bit of them has been put in here. But if our whole idea of how everything's relating is completely wrong anyway, we're already connected with them, we're already interpenetrating with them. So it's just been a shift. Okay, then some things accessible to us that weren't before, but it's not such a big deal. It's kind of, was it worth it?
And if we receive a pig's heart in a transplant,
Yeah.
do we become partly a pig? Or is it just a muscle?
Or maybe the pig whose heart it was, and us, whoever we are, we have a stronger connection than we ever would have done before. Maybe that's benefited the pig a lot.
I wouldn't go so far as that.
Well, it's not such a strange way of thinking. It's not such a strange way of thinking. But because we do tend to put things into very tight categories as separate, it's quite difficult for us to think in any other way, isn't it? But it's good to try. This sort of thing, this might actually all be very different from what I thought.
There also might be mechanical things instead of.
Yes.
How does mechanical?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
stuff-
That's
what
very
happens
interesting.
there?
So if that's our heart, and then you get if we had a mechanical heart put in,
Yeah, or bits of heart, mechanical. It is done.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the bits,
it's very interesting, isn't it? Because that doesn't involve another person's mind, does it? But it would involve a lot of people, wouldn't it? But then our sense of what our heart is, I think this is what Namjal's getting at. Our sense of what our heart is would be the same, wouldn't it? If I had that put in me, all my, I would carry on my life with all my relationships and connections the same as before, and my sense of my heart being there as before. But all the connections on what we call in the physical level would have changed, wouldn't they? Which, of course, they're changing all the time anyway. But then what does any of it mean? Because even if you think about your heart, that's your heart, it's your body, and it's your heart. But then when you try to think, so where in my heart do I live? You can't make any sense of it, can you? Do I live in that little metal valve? Or do I live in that bit of pig that's in me? So which is... There must be a connection, because it's now my heart. But what is the nature of that connection? And then coming back to this Chittamatra view, well, there can't be that they're that separate, otherwise we wouldn't know it. They could never have been that separate. And that's what they then say, well, as long as you're seeing things as separate in that way, you won't see the true nature of emptiness. And then they use the dream example, like in a slightly different way, that when you're dreaming, it all seems very real. But actually, it's your mind that's made up both you and what you're dreaming of. They're not different. And that's all they're saying, which in a way isn't much, because you're still left with the question, so what the hell is it?
And what do I wake up for?
Hmm?
And what do I wake up
Yes, yes. What would waking up mean? Yeah, what would be waking up out of that? What would that be? So you don't really get an answer to that in the Chittamatra stage of these 5 stages, but it's worth just spending the time contemplating that one thing, really, of this inside and outside and how mysterious that is. And that's really all you need to get from this stage, really. You've done the thing of the mysteriousness that I'm not those skandhas I'm grasping at. And actually nothing can be separate because it doesn't make any sense. And then remembering that when you're doing your formless meditation, just remembering, any time I'm thinking it's separate, it doesn't make sense. So what? It's good to spend a lot of time feeling, that uncomfortable feeling of just coming back again and again to that uncomfortable place where you realise you don't know. Because that's where some opening can happen, from really allowing yourself not to know. Because that means you're dropping that mind that thinks it knows. Yes?
I can't remember exactly on what context, but I thought I heard you say awareness when nothing manifests.
Yes, I did.
I can't get my head around that. Awareness when nothing's manifesting.
All right.
Am I missing something?
It is a deep point. It's a very deep point. Yes. This is where, in here I've got teaching given individually as a pointing out instruction, because you can say that and it seems like almost makes sense, but when you're actually practicing meditation, you reach that point yourself where you want to know that, and then you can come and talk to me about it, and we can see where we go from there. But in the instruction manuals, if you like, on how to approach the nature of mind, first of all, you spend a lot of time just learning a bit of shamatha, being able to just sit and let go into space until that's become quite stable. And then a series of instructions about how thoughts arise, and then guiding the student through how the thoughts arise and what they're recognising in their own experience. And everybody expresses that differently, So if I were to just give a general teaching on it, you could all write it down, notes, but it's not in the words, it's really in the way you're meditating. And then from there, you can start to see what we're talking about in terms of not grasping. If you talk about manifestation, when there's awareness, when there's manifestation, awareness, another manifestation, you sort of think, I can grasp that idea of awareness, and I can grasp that idea of a manifestation, and I can grasp the idea of a difference. And actually, there's no way forward with that kind of mind. I don't know if that helps.
I don't know.
It's important to ask these questions.
Can I ask what is real? Because my reality from this end of the room is from my senses and my thoughts and my preconceived ideas and my perspective. And your sense of reality from that end of the room is from your senses, seeing the fronts of people's heads rather than the backs. It's different with your experience and past experiences. So I understand the two realities can be very different of the same experience, the same moments, series of moments that have been happening. Is the value just in knowing that your experience can be quite different from mine, or do I need to actually resolve what is the real reality?
I would say you had to resolve what is the real, yes. That would be the liberation. Because otherwise you're just left with, like lots of stuff.
Because it's broken the illusion that what I see is is actually happening.
So it's the first step, isn't it? It's the first step towards another way of knowing, which is the difficult thing to... It's not that difficult to get a little flash of it has to be, but the journey then to make that real,
all the time.
So that it's stabilised and the full significance of it dawns. That takes a lot of time, a lot of discipline, a lot of commitment, a lot of conviction, really, because if you don't have the conviction, you don't put in the effort. And then, of course, it's not effort and all that stuff, Yeah. Okay. We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully.